Hello, my name is Chiara Cristina Ventura. I'm the founder of Artsy Window, the AW Classroom podcast where we talk to young artists of color and also creatives who are in the field. Today, we are sitting here with Larry Ossei Mensah. And if you don't know, Larry is also my mentor and we collaborated on a bunch of projects. So I'm so excited to sit here virtually and talk to him. Larry, can you introduce yourself? What is your practice and what do you focus on?
So my name is Larry Ossei Mensah. I'm a curator, also co-founder of Art Noir, which is a global collective that was created to uplift and celebrate the work of Black and Brown creatives, as well as help educate and cultivate the next generation of Black and Brown patrons. And a lot of my work is really just focused on platforming Black and Brown voices, marginalized voices, so whether that be LGBTQ, voices that I feel personally are at the center of my life and my world, but within the mainstream is just becoming part of that conversation in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And so now really making an effort to do the work, not only just within an exhibition context, but, through dialogues like this, through, conversations that I was doing with like one of my mentors, Troy Carter, the Parlor series, really make sure that all the energy that is around Black and Brown artists right now within the mainstream is consistent. Because you have a lot of people who think about it as a trend. And I think anyone who asks me if it's a trend, then that I automatically question the commitment, to these voices. I've been curating for 12 years now.
Over a decade.
Yeah. And so I've always been committed to platforming these voices. But I think over time that's kind of evolved and morphed to think about other marginalized voices, right? So, or dialogue or conversations and questions that I have that, people who exist on the margins, live on the margins, work on the margins. Mm-hmm. In terms, and I don't want to frame the margins as lesser. Mm-hmm. I think it's just when you compare it to kind of like pop mainstream, and then for me, really just kind of my daily reality. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do I bring my daily reality to a broader audience? But then also, how do I bring my daily reality to an audience that might not feel seen, mm-hmm. right? And create various platforms and vehicles for that to occur. Mm-hmm. Even through just like mentorship, and you have tons of ideas that you want to bring to fruition, and how can I be of service to help you do that? Yeah. In the way that's authentic to you, in a way that you have the resources you need to do it at the highest level. Because I think, the one thing about curating, particularly if you're not affiliated with an institution, so much of it, starts with an idea and then trying to find the resources and the platform to execute this idea. And 9 times out of 10, those resources tend to be limited. Yeah. And so then you're forced to get creative in terms of like, okay, how can I make sure, like something that I've become adamant about is, if I'm doing shows with nonprofit spaces, making sure that the artist gets some type of stipend.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes it might not be a lot of money, but I think it's just a gesture that you're compensating them for their intellectual property and their creativity. Mm-hmm. But then on the same token, making sure that curators are getting paid, and they're getting paid appropriately. Mm-hmm. Because unless you're in-house someplace, it's pretty difficult to maintain a living curating. Yeah. Unless you're creative, unless you take a more entrepreneurial approach. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the things that were considered taboo 5-10 years ago now is just normal, right? So it's like, curators working with brands, working with corporations. Mm-hmm. But how do you still do that with integrity and still pushing the agenda that grounds your curatorial practice.
Keeping yourself authentic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like, I'm not a believer that you need to starve in order to be part of this ecosystem, this community. I think there's plenty of money moving around.
Yep.
I think, and if you move from the mindset of abundance and infinite possibility, this can be a worthwhile endeavor, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just always thinking about, we talk about it like how can you make sure everything you're doing is intentional, right?
Yeah.
And the work being the testimony to your passion and your vision. And people see that, but it also takes a consistency, a clarity of voice.
Yeah.
And also just being able to say no to things that just are subpar, which can be challenging. But it's like,
for me, like as a young curator, it's kind of hard to say no to some things because at the end of the day, like that's an opportunity.
Yeah.
For you. It may be an opportunity for, it might be an opportunity for the artist that you're supporting, that you have been supporting and having ongoing relationships with. But then you kind of just have to like weigh, is it worth it? You know what I mean? Are they going to be covering us in the light that we deserve, And I feel like I'm just getting to that point where I'm kind of like, I have the confidence to kind of say no to things.
Yeah.
Or just say, or be, maybe if something doesn't align with me, being able to be like, well, there's someone else that might better fit. But
I think also just like part of the process of this work is this, just fighting for what you believe in, right? So there'll be times where like you think they're aligned, and then you get halfway through the process and you're just like, oh damn, what did I get myself into? And so I think being clear on what your values are, what the intention is, and I think it's an important question to ask yourself, like, is this worth it? Is this going to be something that's going to be memorable? Right? Because I think I probably was guilty of just like pumping out shows.
Yeah.
Just to kind of validate myself.
Yeah.
Right. And want to be accepted. Which, when I look in hindsight, it's kind of crazy. Because, there'll be years where I would do like 10 shows.
Yeah, that's crazy. I remember when I first met you and we had the initial conversations and you were telling me how many shows you did. I'm just like, and it's even crazier if a lot of them are group shows and it involves a lot of artists and a lot of communicating with the galleries, with the artists, all at the same time, getting their paperwork done, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and 99% of those shows I did by myself. I didn't have administrative support. Yeah. And so, as you figure things out and it goes back to like, this is an opportunity, but also like, I'm compelled most of the time. There are artists that I just want to be in dialogue with, or artists that I just feel like people need to know who they are.
Exactly.
But, as I've grown in my career, I've realized that there are different ways that I can do that. That can be through like an IG Live now.
Yeah.
That could be through writing an article. Or like when people ask me who are artists to watch, I kind of have them in my head.
Yeah.
So being expansive in what that dialogue can look like, I think is important. And then over time, if you have like, the privilege to kind of spend more time developing a show, developing an idea, because a lot of these shows, I was developing between a 3 to 6 month window.
Yeah.
Right. Which I've like become known for, where people can call me and be like, yo, I need to do this show tomorrow. And like, I can do it. But now trying to be mindful of like, well, what if I had like a year to just kind of really think about this, do research, and, make it super airtight, And so, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to backtrack, because also we connect because we're both from the Bronx. So I want to know, yeah, what was your upbringing like in terms of your household? Yeah, just what was your upbringing like? What was it like being a young Larry in the Bronx?
So my parents are both from Ghana. My brother and I were born in New York. Went to Catholic school for 12 years. My neighborhood's predominantly Dominican, Puerto Rican, West African, Caribbean. So working class. And it's interesting because I was talking to a friend the other evening, and like, I live across the street from a group home and a drug rehab center.
Oh, wow.
And so like, and this is what I know. And then there's an SRO down the street, transitional housing. And so that's kind of the norm for me, where they were just like, this is a lot of activity and energy, and like, you know, you see people with addiction moving through, but for me, it's just kind of normal. But they trained me to kind of like read the energy of a space and know when to kind of move on because something's about to pop up.
Oh, yeah. That New York energy. You'd be like, oh, I got to get to the next train car. Let me just slip to the next one real quick.
But then growing up in the Bronx, because I didn't grow up, you know, outside of graffiti, which I took for granted, you know, my exposure to art is minimal beyond like school trips.
Yeah.
And then in high school, I took an art class with Mr. Torres, who still teaches there. I went to Cardinal Hayes, and that began to plant the seed. And interestingly enough, last year I went back and got to spend some time with him, not really realizing that like those conversations and those classes were planting the seed for what I would be doing now. But, you know, I think for me, it was just about hard work.
Were you like a straight A student?
I was like AB.
AB?
No,
okay.
No. I didn't have the latitude of chilling. Like, anytime I thought I had the latitude of chilling, my mom would show her the check she has to write to pay my tuition. You know, so like, you know, my parents sacrificed a lot for me and my brother to get, you know, a good education. And so we just, you know, school, there was no room to play.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I was in honors. I took AP classes. And it was all good. Like I didn't, you know, I never felt like, and I think that was the benefit of going to an all boys school. Like you're not trying to really impress nobody.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And for me, I knew that, you know, education was going to be my track towards, you know, being a productive, you know, citizen, right? And so, you know, growing up in the Bronx, and I'm still in the Bronx, has just been super informative. It just gives you spidey senses in terms of how you deal with people, how to deal with uncomfortable situations, how to think on your feet. Yeah, your head's always on a swivel, so you're always
how
paying
to
attention.
respond.
Yeah. And then from my junior year of high school to college, I interned in the record business. So I interned at Sony Music, working in marketing, publishing, A&R.
And you studied music business, right?
No, I studied business management.
Business management, okay.
So I you know, Susan Moultrie, who, you know, we still talk occasionally, incredible business mind. She was at Sony. She worked with Tyra Banks. Gave me my first gig, and you know, just exposed me to just another world. You know, because it's like I wasn't seeing young Black executives who were like shaping the culture. Right? I mean, we talk about the culture so much, but it's like, you know, back in '96, you know, so much of it was instinctual. It was competitive. You know, people were getting $1 million budgets to do things. For a lot of people, it was the first exposure to like that kind of money. Transitioning from out of whatever kind of life they were previous to that. And I just did deep research, and I researched the record industry, and I wanted to be a record man, like Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Erdogan and Quincy Jones and Puffy and L.A. Reid, because I saw that these guys, whether they were musicians or business people, had a vision and a passion for what they did. They wanted to find talent that really could be the voice of our generation. But then as you begin to unpeel the layers and see like the other sides of the game, I realized that wasn't something that I could stomach. But I mean, it informs my curatorial practice in terms of like how I deal with artists, how I communicate with artists, being in studio sessions and like watching how engineers or producers are coaxing artists to kind of like do takes again, for example, and just really trying to get the best out of them. But even just down to how I think about exhibitions, and like just a whole rollout and, rolling out an exhibition almost like you're rolling out an album. And so I think that experience, and I studied business management in undergrad. So I went to Clark University, which is a small liberal arts school in Massachusetts. Also was super informative because, one, I was in an environment, I switched from an environment that was predominantly Black and brown to an environment that's predominantly white, right? And learning how to just navigate that, right? And learning that I didn't know I was working class until I got to college because I didn't have a computer. Everybody had a laptop, and I had to go to the computer lab. Which was an interesting realization. Like, I would never say I was poor. I was just working class. I mean, the things that I got exposed to, either through family or just through, internships and work opportunities, they're priceless. But that experience just exposed me to different ways of creating. And then, from there, I worked in advertising, media, went to grad school in Switzerland, studied marketing and hospitality management, with the aspirations of like being in that space. And that's where I caught the art bug, because I was living in Switzerland for a year, traveling around Europe because it's pretty affordable if you know how to hustle it.
Exactly.
And then
pretty cheap too.
You say what?
Rent is pretty cheap too.
Depending on where you live.
Yeah, when I studied abroad like when I studied abroad in Madrid, like people had nice apartments like near the city for like $800 a month,
Yeah. But I mean, that exposure was good in that it taught me to like do my best to step out of this Western paradigm of like, how do you make decisions? How do you work with people? How do you collaborate? Because like I had classmates from India, Greece, China, Central America, Latin America. And so they all come with their own ways of living, seeing the world, and learning from that. And that experience also kind of really, that, and then I worked with the World Economic Forum for 3 years, informed this curiosity about traveling and seeing the world and understanding how other people live.
Is this where the young global mindset came into fruition?
So my friend Steve, who lives in Geneva, we met in 2004. And the World Economic Forum has this subset group called Young Global Leaders, YGL. And like he was like, "Oh, you're YGL," Young Global Larry.
Oh shoot.
But it was also having an opportunity to meet Quincy Jones. And you meet someone like Quincy Jones, it's like, what's the secret to life?
Yeah.
You got stupid questions like that. And he was like, see the world, see how other people live. And like we were talking, and then this French woman comes, and then he just starts speaking to her in French. I'm just like, oh, that's fly. I need that. Player shit.
That's that global shit.
Yeah, but I think, you know, as you know, the diaspora is global. And there are certain environments where there's structures in place that are designed to suppress us and dim our light. And then there are other places where we thrive and we're, you know, living our and being our full self. So for me, it's always, that's how I learn, you know, just by just being in a space and observing, you know, eating food, spending time with artists or friends, and just really trying to, like, you know, do this ethnographic research. And then that's where a lot of the ideas from shows come from. And so, you know, my journey has just been these layers on top of layers on top of layers. And I think I've been lucky to recognize that they've all been building blocks and teaching moments that have got me to where I am now. And then it gives me just a certain insight that I hopefully can share with other, you know, artists, curators, you know, and it just helps you read the tea leaves, you know, because history does repeat itself, certain patterns repeat itself. The context might be different. You can normally put it together and just be like, okay, I think this is what's going to happen.
So I'm curious of the story of how you, like, I guess officially began like your curatorial journey, and how, I mean, you have a pretty dynamic background and a unique background, a non-traditional background, to be like a curator. You studied hospitality and management and business. So how did that background inform you beginning your curatorial career?
So my curatorial career started in 2008. My first show, I was working as a photographer, me and my good friend Stanley Lumax. We did a show at this boutique, Harriet's Alter Ego, which used to be on Flatbush. And, you know, I think for me, it's always kind of just started by doing. And I think because of my background, I won't say gives me an edge, but it definitely gives me a unique perspective, right? Where I'm able to just kind of process information in a different way. But yeah, it started out doing photography. I realized that wasn't for me. Then I started writing. And through writing, you know, I got to interview, like, you know, this is like 2009, 2010, you know, Njideka, Toyin, Maleko, Rashid Johnson, like all these artists that...
These are pretty big name artists.
Yeah, like, no, but I mean, this was over a decade ago.
Yeah, but like at the time, like, how did you get to meet everyone? Were these just like the homies that were just like part of the circle, or?
Well, so Toyin was still in school, and so we got connected through Hank Willis Thomas. And Njideka was at Yale, so I met her at Yale, and then she did the Studio Museum residency. Maleko, we met at Studio Museum. So it's a mix. I mean, a lot of artists, you know, that we would consider kind of household names, I've known them for over 10 years, 15 years, and they're friends, right? And I learned early that it's more important for me to cultivate my relationship with the artist than trying to cultivate relationships with galleries. And like, you know, now it's changed with other curators. Before it was just like, I wasn't really being accepted by the establishment because I didn't have the pedigree. I had a lot of curators who didn't really show me love, you know, because it's like they were trying to figure out what it was that I was doing in the space.
Yeah, you know, I'm also I'm interested because even for me now, like when I describe myself as a curator, and then usually when I say that, someone is like, oh, so what museum or gallery do you work at? And then I'm like, oh, well, you know, I work on my own, or I collaborate with people. Like I don't like really saying the word freelance, but I'm like, okay, independent curator is like the best way to
I stopped using that.
Yeah.
Because like I was watching this talk and I always share it with people.
Yeah.
Okunwe and Wesley did the talk at the Asian Society. And they had asked him something about like independent curators, and he was like, I don't really see myself as independent because that sounds like you're hustling for jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
He says non-affiliated. Non-affiliated doesn't feel sexy to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just curator. I think, but those are the tactics that I think I wouldn't call them microaggressions, but they're just kind of ways of kind of qualifying you.
Yeah.
And I think
you need an institution name to give you that stamp. Yeah. Like, I'm official.
And the thing is that I learned from, someone who I consider to be a mentor, that you have to kind of make a decision. Are you an institutional curator or not? Right? Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with not being an institutional curator. Because I've done both.
Yeah.
I think it's really like what's going to allow you for your voice to really resonate and your ideas to really resonate. Because for me, at the end of the day, if you're a curator and you're putting out amazing ideas, shows, books, like I just got Nicole's book,
nice.
Fleetwood,
dope.
Marking Time, and this is actually going to be an exhibition that'll be on view at PF1, hopefully in the fall. And then there's the other one. I'm trying to find another one. I can't find it, but like Color People Time, that was at the IPA.
Nice.
And so, for me, it's like I'm comfortable in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so, like when people are like, "Oh, what museum do you curate at?" and I just say I work with museums and institutions all around the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's like sometimes that question feels like it's a dig.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, years ago, it used to make me feel bad. And so I think that's why I got into that pace of like doing all these shows as a way to be like, well, I actually have 5 shows coming up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of silly.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I'm curious as to like, because even for me introducing myself in this time, like 2020, people are like, oh, okay, so you work on your own, you work with different galleries, blah, blah, blah. Like they still kind of like, I don't know, it still seems like curating and not working for just with one institution is a pretty new thing. Like there are a lot of curators, but it's like, I feel like the public doesn't have their mind wrapped around it yet. So I'm curious as like for you, when you were in the beginning of your journey, I could just imagine, people kind of like really confused about like, okay, how are you moving,
Well, I think the thing that I always also have to point out is that like I was working a full-time job in curating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? I was working until 2015 and curating. So like, because I hadn't really come to the understanding that I can do this full time and make a living.
Yeah.
Because at the time, like you do a show and they'll be like, "Oh, we got $500 for you."
Yeah.
And I was just more excited about the opportunity because I knew I had a check coming from my day job.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, when I made the transition out of my corporate life, at the urging of my last corporate boss, Angelita Sierra,
mm-hmm.
I worked at Nickelodeon doing marketing.
Oh, wow.
And she basically was like, yo, like, and I was on contract. She was like, I'm not renewing your contract.
Oh.
I'm like, what?
Mm.
And she was like, well, you seem to be passionate about this art thing. You just need to go out and get it.
Nice.
And if it doesn't work out, you can always find another job.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have many opportunities to really pursue the thing that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't understand the gift she was giving me at the time.
Yeah. Were
And
you
I was
mad?
mad for a long time.
Yeah.
I was mad for a long time.
Yeah, I can just imagine.
I
Yeah.
was pissed. I was like, how am I going to pay the rent? You know? And
Yeah.
then, but the universe, that's just how it works. It worked in my favor. And I think I might have got an email from Brooke Anderson, who's at PAFA, telling me about the ICI Curatorial Intensive.
Nice.
I think the deadline was in like 2 days or something crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't going to apply. I was like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there was like a fee. It was like all types of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember having lunch with Rashida Bumbre, who's a good friend, amazing curator, amazing artist, amazing cultural worker. And like she cut the lunch short. And she was like, go do the application.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, damn. And I did it and I ended up getting it. And it was like life-changing, because it was me and a group of other incredible curators. And I learned that curatorial practice is not just something that happens between four walls.
Mm-hmm.
One, but then it was also like an environment where like, because ICI is a very important organization within the art world, and to like be validated by that. Renault's, incredible, and has consistently been supportive, and he gives you that tough love. Because
I want to just define what ICI means. So ICI means Independent Curators International, right?
Yeah. And so for me, I call it like the governing body for curators.
Yeah.
And what I love about Renault is that like, everything that he's telling you is coming from a place of love and wanting to see you win.
Yeah.
But he will call you on your bullshit. And be like, you fucking around.
Yeah.
And it never feels attacking. It's just like level up.
Yeah.
And you need people like that around you, because you can be coasting, getting all the accolades, and you get it twisted. And I think having people around you who like all they got to do is say one thing and it just puts the battery in your back. And so doing that really kind of just shifted the trajectory. Because we also have mentors. So like Thelma was our mentor. Trevor Shoemaker was our mentor.
That's fire.
In the group. And so I would say like that's when I really like had to make the pivot. And just start figuring it out and like doing shows, doing projects.
At that time too, who were other people who were curators or organizers or directors in the art world that, you just named some now, but like, who were people that you were also looking up to? Like, because for me, it's just like, okay, you're my mentor. I look up to you, and it's like, and there's so many other, gallerists and stuff that I'm just like, ooh, I want a little bit of that,
Well, so my mentors are not, or people I respond to are not just in the art world, right? So I learned a long time ago that you have to apply some design thinking.
Yeah.
Because if you're just kind of siloed in one space, then you begin to kind of be part of that box.
Yeah.
So obviously Thelma, for many of us, is like, like words don't even explain, but like, Franklin Sermons has been super supportive. Klaus Biesenbach has been super supportive. Renault has been super supportive. Susan Cross, who we collaborated on a project together at Mass Mocha to co-curate Allison Janae Hamilton's first solo show, has been super supportive. In terms of dealers, Joanna at Jack Shaman, Claude, his former business partner, may he rest in peace. And then like outside of the art world, Troy Carter has been an amazing mentor. Kevin Pemberton, who's a good friend, has been an amazing mentor. I mean, there's so many people, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's not just about like how do you navigate the art world, but it's also like how do you just navigate life, right?
Yeah.
And then also just being mindful that like don't let this define you, which is like something that I've been personally working on.
Yeah.
Yes, it's what people know me for, but like I'm more than just a curator. I'm a baker now.
What you baking?
Bread. But just like not subscribing to this idea that you're a monolith, right? Particularly when you think about Black and brown folks, there's always this desire to kind of put us in a box.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so for me, it's just like I want to exude my fullness, but in a way that like is intentional.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think there was a point where like in my mind, I thought being multi-hyphenate was like shit. Right? And so being like a curator, a writer, a critic, a blah, blah, blah. And so like, which I found just ended up confusing people. And so that's why I'm just like curator and co-founder of Art Noir. And that's it. And that just encompasses all the things that I'm interested in, the things that I'm passionate about. And, just not trying to like perform for people, and it's just like, something that me and, a good friend of mine, Amani Olu, he's from Philly. And he also, came to the art world, as an outsider, and we always talked about getting into ski mask way because like the art world's not going to invite you in.
No.
Right. And so it's like, we had to use, that BX Philly energy to apply pressure and force our way into environments.
Yeah. And make your own platform, basically.
Exactly. And create our own table. Right. And I think Art Noir has been that for me and my 6 other co-founders. We're creating our own table, and not looking for someone to kind of invite us to the party, because at the end of the day, we know we make culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We're very clear, confident, and affirmed in that. So now what do we do to kind of educate people and amplify that understanding that, we make culture globally?
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to get more into the artwork that you see yourself gravitating towards, because it sometimes is hard, at least for me, to describe the type of work that I'm into or that I'm like really drawn to, because you like different mediums, or I don't know, I guess for me it's just like I like seeing things that are new, or even thinking from like art historical context. I'm like, okay, like have I seen this before in art history? Are they responding to something in art history? What are things that you think about in terms of the artwork or the artist that you are like, that you easily just gravitate towards? Do you think of the artist first? Do you look at the artwork simply and then think of the artist? Yeah.
It starts with the ideas.
Yeah.
Because I know plenty of talented artists with no ideas, no perspective.
Okay.
So for me, it's like, what are the ideas that you're offering us through the practice? Do those ideas pique my interest? Do they make me uncomfortable? Do they make me excited? Because I always use like Yinka Shonabari, who's one of my favorite artists, as an example. When you look at like the different modalities that he's articulated, these artistic gestures, whether it's sculpture, digital drawing, photography, installation, that all stems from just kind of really concrete, nuanced, developed ideas, right?
And research too.
And research. But I think conversely, I do look at the art as well, but I'm not necessarily looking at it in terms of like the technician.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see the hand. The hand move in a way that I haven't seen before. Right? Because you can go to school and learn how to paint.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, but there's a move, and it's so, I mean, a lot of it comes from music, right? Because it's like when someone sings, you know, everybody has like certain vocal ranges or octaves. So like you look at someone like a Bob Dylan who like vocally is not great, right? But there's a vibration from his music that's allowed him to resonate and cut through, right? And so, I mean, I could say the same for like, you know, A Keys, who like doesn't have an expansive range like a Mariah Carey does, but like she brings an energy and a vibe. And so for me, I'm trying to see, does the hand move in a certain way that brings an energy and vibe that I haven't seen before, or is reminiscent of something else, but still they're working towards like giving it his own voice. Like I think about like Ray Charles when he started in his career, sounded like Nat King Cole. You know, and then when Ray kind of found his voice, you know, blending soul music and gospel music to kind of create this new, well, blues and gospel, I believe, to create this other kind of space. So are the artists doing that? I look at material a lot. You know, what is your material use, your application of the material?
How does the material inform the work too?
Yeah, like there was an artist, I forget his name, from Ghana who like makes paintings. He won't call them paintings.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this conversation, paintings from recycled material. You know, so instead of paint, you know, he'll use like the packaging of like a top pop label that's orange to give you that orange. You know, I look at work ethic, you know, because I like, particularly when I'm talking to like my finance friends or my tech investor friends, you know, and I'm like, you know, you got to look at an artist like a startup, you know, right? And the artist is the founder, right? And the ideas of what they manifest through their creative production. And for me, I'm looking at what is their capacity to kind of produce at a high level, what is their desire to be the best, you know, constantly challenge themselves, but then how do they also navigate adversity, right? Because like, it gets different when you start getting attention. It gets different when you start getting press. It gets different when you start making real bread. Right? And how do you stay centered and grounded within that? Because I've seen people go off the rails for a variety of reasons. And so these are all the different calculations I'm making. So it's not just like this is a dope painting, but it's like, what happens when this artist who's selling me a painting now for $2,000 is selling for $20? You know, because money changes people, exposure changes people, people get amnesia, but that's life. And then, you know, their desire to kind of to change the canon. Right? And so I think what I've tried to be better at, because, you know, my career really is kind of grounded in showcasing the work of emerging artists, is now to look at masters. You know, so like someone like Peter Williams, who I co-curated a show with Rebecca from Trinisolf at MoCAT, Black Universe. This is my second show with Peter. You know, Peter's a master of his craft. His work, you know, is so of the moment in terms of like critiquing white supremacy, police brutality, systematic racism, but using dark humor and art history as another kind of vehicle to like push this conversation. You know, and I met Peter when I did ICI. So I met Peter in 2016. You know, and I've had the honor of, you know, doing 2 shows with him. You know, or someone like MacArthur Binion, who I've been able to get to know and like just sit and listen to, you know? So I think now is just trying to make sure that, you know, I do what I do. I mean, even though Peter's a master at his craft, I feel like not enough people know about his work.
Yeah.
And what he's doing. So it's always going to be about like voices who I feel like are offering us something different and unique and just might not have been celebrated in the way they need to be. Or voices who are like at the beginning of their career, they still don't even know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that's where the curatorial work kind of comes into play, where like you see a vision for them that they might not see, and then you have to basically work with them to coax them to kind of get to that level.
Yeah, and just remind them of their power too.
Exactly. Because I think,
just to be like, oh, you're onto something, right? You know, like, but also give them, you know, insight of the reality of things.
Yeah. And I think that's what, like, you know, the time working in music helped me, because it's like you learn how to give constructive feedback without it I don't want to say feel negative, but some people can just be like hard. And I think for me, it's like I've learned how to like phrase it in a way where the artist can kind of arrive to their own conclusion, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so like they might be like, oh, what do you think? And like, you know, being able to just find the best in it, but then also be like, you still got to push.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, you know, I've been lucky to befriend artists who are like doing it at the highest level.
Yeah.
Just kind of observe and spend time and talk with them. And so I use those insights to kind of share with young artists, to not be satisfied with like, you know, an Instagram like or somebody's following you. I'm like, this is a marathon. You know, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, pat yourself on the back.
Yeah.
But then it's like, we got to keep it going.
Yeah.
Because the thing is like, you got to keep leveling up, because you're, you know, unfortunately only as good as your last painting.
Speaking of that, I wanted to get into, I guess, visiting studios and meeting artists, because I remember one of the first experiences where I really got to like spend time with you, but also see how you like face to face like interacted with artists was when I think it was like January 2019 when we first started working together, and then we went to do studio visits at Yale. MFA program. So we went to a whole bunch of studios at Yale, and then I remember we were in an Uber to go to another studio, and you were like, yeah, we're going to meet my friend Titus. And I can't lie, you probably don't know this, but in the car, I was like, yo, who's Titus? Who's Titus? Yeah. So I like Googled Titus. And then like, I was like, oh, Titus Kafar. I was like, oh, okay. I had a fan moment, because I remember when I did an internship at the Brooklyn Museum, and I did a whole presentation about his work. And when he did a series on men who were incarcerated with the
Jerome Project.
Yeah. And and then we went to his studio, and I just remember being there and kind of observing how he was talking about his work, and then seeing the work, and then I was like, oh, okay. So it was nice to like go from the Yale studios of, you know, students still in their masters, they're in their early 30s or in their 20s, you know, and they're just starting out and building a language around their work. And then we went to Titus's studio, and he has this language built around his work, where it's to a point where he talks about it. It could be something like concise, and you look at the work and you're like, oh, I get it. And it's not that the work is too literal. It's just that he already built this whole conversation around his work. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is like, when you go into an artist's studio, no matter where they're at in their careers, what are you thinking about? And what kind of questions do you ask them?
I mean, I think for me, I'm hoping to be surprised. I don't really go in with like a set of questions. Like I just kind of go in. It's also dependent on why am I doing the visit.
Yeah.
Most visits I do just to get a better understanding of the practice. If I don't know the artist, if I know the artist, it's just a time to hang out. And just kind of spitball ideas around work that they're doing. It's funny, like I can count the amount of ones I've done for shows. But I just look at them all as this kind of continual conversations and dialogues. And I'm just trying to get an understanding of where they are now. And then also be able to picture like where could they be like 6 months from now. A lot of times try to identify challenges that they might have with works and hopefully be able to make a recommendation that gives them something to think about.
Yeah.
And maybe, explore. Yeah. But I'm honestly there to learn and just understand. And, I'm also a collector, so I'm looking for like that little piece you got in the corner that's turned around, upside down, covered with a sheet that you don't want nobody to see. Because a lot of times it's interesting. I think with the younger artists, I don't see as much editing. Where like, over time I've seen the artists like they're like super diligent about what they let come out of the studio. Just because they made it don't mean it's good. And so, but in those works that maybe they don't find to be successful, trying to understand why. Because then that's where you open up this door for like a very vulnerable, honest conversation. And, a lot of works that I end up collecting are kind of like the cast-offs. And they're like, you like this? And I'm like, yeah. But I'm able to articulate why I like it. And then you end up seeing elements of that in like a new body of work.
Yep.
So for me, it's about learning, spending time, because I'm self-taught, like I have to do these visits, to kind of understand how artists process, how artists make work, how artists research. So it's a constant education. And so, like, I remember I was doing an article on like Lorna Simpson a couple years ago, and like visited her studio in Fort Greene, and like everything that I learned just spending time with her, or like, doing visits with like Derrick Adams. But what's interesting is like through those experiences, that's why like, Art Noir, we propose doing these virtual visits, right? Because now the world can kind of see how a visit operates. And there's different ways. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think the only wrong way is if there's no art to see.
Yeah.
No, I won't say that, because I have done visits where there's no art to see.
Yeah, or they just did a solo show, so they're like, "Yo, my studio's right now, but what's up?"
Yeah.
Like,
But for me, it's just about the dialogue.
Yeah.
And exercising that muscle, that mind muscle. And hopefully leaving the visit excited.
Yeah.
Because it's like the worst feeling is to leave a visit feeling like you just wasted your time.
Yeah.
And I think the visits for me are the core to why I do this. Like anytime I'm like having a shitty day or I'm stressed out or whatever, it's like therapy.
Yeah.
To just like sit with an artist, have a beer or water or whatever.
Yeah.
And just look at this painting.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't talk about art. We might not talk about the art that we're looking at. Like, Maleko Makose, who's become a good buddy, we just chew the fat and we just have these intellectual debates, and it's like we do not see eye to eye on a lot of things. And for me, it's exciting because we know that like it's coming from a good place, so it's not attacking.
Yeah.
And then sometimes he'll say something that makes me think. I'll say something that makes him think. And so I think, for curators, it's important to do visits And it doesn't always have to be about going to see art. It really could also just be about spending time, right? Because like I've been able to build a lot of these relationships because the artists trust me. And they know that I'm going to do whatever it takes to be within their interest, because it's for me about the artist first. It's not about the gallery. It's not about the museum. It's about like making sure that the artist's interest is protected to the best of my ability.
Yeah. I think also, it's just like an energy of like just saying what's on your mind, or like we'll sometimes talk about what the thing is. Usually the artwork is informed by their lived experience, so it's like we just end up talking about life.
I mean, like Titus I've known over a decade, you know, and I've gone to all his New York shows when he was with Benda. And so like, and I credit him as being like one of the artists that kind of gave me my Saul to Paul moment, you know, because the first time I saw his work was in 2008. House of Campari used to do these exhibitions, and you know, he had one of his paintings, the figure was cut out and it was on the floor, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? You know, and it was mind blowing. And you know, and I always tell him that, you know, so I think for me, it's I'm always honored that he just makes time to just chat and hang out. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to formally collaborate with him, you know, in an exhibition format or something like that.
Yeah, and also something I remember just admiring you from doing studio visits with you and everything, and just seeing the way that you talk to artists, is that's the thing. Like, I don't want to come into the studio with like some big energy where it's just like, well, you should do this. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't ever want to like impose a certain idea on someone else's work or anything. But something I do like about you is that you offer super insightful suggestions that make artists think beyond what they're doing, but also just experiment. Like, you're not afraid to say, well, why don't you do this on a sculpture? Or why don't you mess with this on a whatever? Or why don't you talk about that? You know what I mean? Like, they'll say something and maybe they're afraid to like make that big jump to be like, well, I'm going to stop doing figure and start going abstract. You know, you're not afraid to like be like, you know, kind of take into account like what they're working on, what they're thinking of, and be like, well, why don't you just do this? And I like it. You're just really like blunt and straightforward about it. And it's just it always comes from a good place, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, like, haven't made pictures, and part of why I stopped making pictures is because it's hard.
Yeah.
Right? And like, to be susceptible to critique, you got to have thick skin. And I just didn't have thick skin in that regard. Like, in terms of curating, I don't really worry about what people are like, because I know you can't make a show that everybody's going to love, right? Yeah. And I've done plenty of shows that have gotten zero press, you know, but that, you know, doesn't deter me from moving forward. But again, that goes back to just the trust. And, you know, I'm lucky that I can see things, right? And so I can see patterns, and I always tell curators, you know, look at as much art as you can, because like, you know, the good artists hide their hand, but if you look long enough, you'll see that, oh, this person pulled from this.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I honor the studio as a sacred space, you know, and I don't take being invited to the studio lightly, right?
Yeah.
And they're inviting you into a space where they create. They're kind of channeling this energy and this spirit and this intention and trying to like put it on the canvas or a sculpture or a photograph or a film. And so, you know, that's not lost on me, and I do my best not to take it for granted. And, you know, again, that comes from the music. Like, you can't tell someone, oh, you got to do another take. That take is shit. I mean, some people can. But 9 times out of 10, the artist will shut down, right? And I think it's my job to keep them open to experimentation and growth. Because, like, you know, most artists might not have that. You know, many galleries, this is a commercial endeavor. They just want you to keep pumping out product. You know, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to try to tell you to do something in a certain way. That's not all galleries. I want to be clear about that. There's some galleries that are great, super supportive. But I think for me, the artist knows that, like, my only skin in the game is that I want to see them win. Other than that, like, I don't directly benefit whether you do something or you don't, you know? Because for me, the more artists from my community and my network that are doing well and they're thriving and are making the kind of work they want to do, the better for all of us, right? You have artists who are launching residencies, artists who are launching grants, like, you know, not being dependent on certain institutions to put frameworks and opportunities in place, because now they know they can do it themselves. And there's a history of that. But now to see more Black and brown artists doing it, you know, working class artists, artists from the margins doing it, that's exciting for me. And so I always just try to be sensitive and be mindful that, like, you know, I could tell you to do this, but you might not be responsive to it. So I'd rather make the recommendation than you respond however it feels appropriate to you.
Also, I think it's super important to also do these studio visits, especially for students that are in school.
Yeah.
I think right now there's a lot of young artists, especially young artists of color, who are speaking out about their art programs and how they face a lot of racist commentary and microaggressions during these critiques. You know, I feel like even when I started curating and hearing stories from art students and stuff, they would say, like, a lot of people would ask them, like, oh, well, why do you have to include your identity in your art? Or why do you have to talk about this? Or, you know, all of those things. So I think it's super important to have a person of color who's also a curator with all of this background and who's working on the field in the real world to come into the studio, and also give the artists more context about their work, and also just remind them, like, yo, there's a whole art world out here where you can operate in certain rooms and operate within the community of color too. And that's something I think you introduced me to. I just remember, like, going to Freeze with you last year and being in certain rooms and being like, yo, that's a gallerist that I look up to and have been following, and just being like, oh shoot, like, that this world actually exists. And coming straight from NYU too, it was just like, I didn't know that, you know?
Yeah.
It's super important.
I think also, like, I learned early to just treat people like people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I never forget one of my first bosses at Sony, Will Strickland, and he was good friends with KRS-One.
Mm-hmm. And
KRS-One came to the office and I started bugging. And he, like, sat me down. And he was like, you cannot fucking do that. I'm like, why? That's the Black. Like, what do you eat? And he was like, no. And so, like, and I think artists appreciate that, whether, you know, they're big names or just getting started, that, you know, you treat them as human beings. You treat them with respect. Mm-hmm. But also, like, people know not to get it twisted, and you're not going to be able to talk to me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so I think, yeah, it goes down to trust. It goes down to respect. I think being mindful of, like, your surroundings. Mm-hmm. But the art world is expansive. And I think for me, particularly when I think about grad students, and that's why, you know, the last 18 months I've been spending time going to smaller programs. So, like, I got invited by TJ Norris, to go to Iowa, or I was in Minnesota in March. Going to smaller programs where they have talented artists, but the school is not committed to bringing in. Well, let me not say the school is not committed. The school hasn't figured out a way to kind of make sure that they are bringing in as many inclusive voices as possible. Because it's not like I go do these visits and just see Black and brown students. I see a spectrum of people, you know. And I think that's important to be clear that, like, you know, I look at artists across the board.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I'm always going to center these voices first.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm not going to work with, you know, Glenn Kaino. We did our project together at BAM.
Mm-hmm.
Federico Solmi. You know, I've done essays with him. We've collaborated. I think it's been in like 2 group shows. And so, you know, I think I see the frustration with students, and I judge the work for the work, obviously factor in like the cultural element. But then I also push the artists to like use these opportunities to kind of like really build the discourse around your work, because it's not going to get easier when you get out of school. Because then once you attach $1 to it, people going to talk all kinds of, like, people say some real disrespectful shit. You know, and like they don't always realize it. And you have some people who come from privilege and just think they can talk to people however they want. And like, if you're not equipped to kind of like jujitsu that shit, it breaks you down emotionally.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why, like, I always say it's important. And that's why, like, when I'm like building a relationship with the artist, it's like, you know, the importance of being mentally fit, you know, physically fit, whatever that looks like, spiritually fit, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, because it's like, and I remember I was talking to, because I had gotten sick, and I was talking to like a you know, artist who's become a great friend, and she was like, you got to take care of yourself.
Exactly.
Because if you ain't good, you can't help any of us out. You can't be of service and do what you do for the community. And that's why, like, you know, I've, you know, become obsessed with, like, you know, running and biking. You know, one, because they serve as these meditative spaces, but 2, it's me doing my part to make sure that, you know, I have my full faculties and facilities to be able to be of service. Because, you know, being a curator is, for me, is about being of service, you know, to artists, being of service to, you know, patrons, particularly patrons of color who like have, I mean, I was talking to a friend yesterday about like an artist who's a friend of mine in their gallery just ghosting them.
Ooh.
And it's just like, you know, and not enough people call it out. And so for me, it's just like, you know, I'll just put you in touch with the artist and y'all figure it out. You know, but giving people the tools to kind of navigate that, you know, because, you know, a lot of galleries kind of have their core group of people that they do business with, you know, and they ain't really trying to have new friends. You know, and if you're not a collector who's a boldface name and is not on the 200 collectors in the world, and, you know, people don't bother to do a basic Google, which is stupid, you run into those challenges. And so for me, it's like, how do I be of service to these artists so they could be sustainable in their practice and do what they love? How can I be of service to these patrons who want to collect work that is reflective of their culture, their identity, the way they see the world? And, you know, and there's some dealers who have been incredible, like Elizabeth D. I mean, she's been another fairy godmother, you know, giving me an opportunity. You know, we did selections in 17 and 18.
Right.
You know, and having an opportunity to show Derek Forjor and Lucia and Emily Henretta.
That's how I found out
Kenny.
about you. I was taking a contemporary art class, and What was it? Yep, I had to do research, and then I looked into Lucia Hiero's work.
Yeah.
Saw that you curated that show at Elizabeth D Uptown, and I was like, oh shoot! And then I started
Yeah.
following you on Instagram.
And
Yeah.
Lucia is a great example. I've known Lucia and Kenny since they finished school, and to be able to like collaborate with her to present her first solo show at a commercial gallery, you know, the first of many. She just had something at Primary Projects.
Mm-hmm.
She's working on an institutional show. You know, so I think I've been lucky, you know, to meet people who like we're on the same page, but they're also going to do what they can to push me to be better, right? And so, and these are people that we go on this journey together, and our roles and positions in the art world will change and evolve, but that relationship remains intact.
Also, and this is what you talked about too, just like the challenges one could face in the art world. As of recently, I mean, as of like the past few months, of course, we're in a pandemic, but also protests were happening in May and early June for Black Lives Matter, but also the LGBTQ community. And I think a lot of institutions and galleries and just art spaces in general, were getting called out or held accountable for not representing enough artists of color, enough artists from the LGBTQ community. And now kind of people are coming out the woodworks, you know, coming through with opportunities to people from marginalized communities. And I've been in some conversations literally where an artist is coming up to me and they're like, yo, this gallery hit me up. Like, what should I do? You know, how can I properly handle the situation in a way where, you know, I'm making sure that I'm benefiting from it, and I'm not getting it taken advantage of, you know? So what advice would you give to just artists right now who might be in those situations where they're making a decision, or people are coming to them with opportunities?
Well, I would say, number one, you're the boss, right? You're the artist. If they're coming to you, whether it's under the pretense of diversity or under the pretense that they really just love what you do as a cultural producer, as an artist, you dictate what's going to happen, right? Because this is your intellectual property that you're producing, and, you know, potentially collaborating with gallerists and dealers to expand the distribution and reach of it. And I think also just don't be afraid. So don't be afraid to assert your agency. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to question something that might not feel good. So go by your intuition. Because a lot of times artists will say yes to things that don't feel good, and then they get screwed in the end, or they feel taken advantage of. Where like you need to be 100% confident that, okay, this person has my best interest with regard to this business relationship, because it's a business relationship, right? And you have to kind of treat it accordingly. I think the tricky part about the art world is that so much of it is about human interaction and relationships that you end up doing things that you wouldn't do in a normal business scenario. So like doing an exhibition, shipping works without the proper paperwork. Shipping works without like proper consignment, not reading the consignment agreement, and knowing that like, you know, you could do a show and payment could be net 60 after the show closes, right? So I think also just kind of educating yourself and understanding your rights, your power, talking to other artists that you admire. But I think not being afraid, because I think a lot of times people take opportunities because they're afraid that another one won't come. But I think that's where you have to have faith in your work, and be steadfast in terms of being diligent and disciplined. You know, and being okay walking away from an opportunity that doesn't feel right, and you just feel like you're going to be taken advantage of. Like, I look at these virtual shows, and, you know, and I question, like, should it be a 50-50 split if like the work is still in my studio and all you've done is created a website, which really like I could encourage like a bunch of artists to be like, yo, you should just start your own platform and just rotate shows within a cooperative. And then you keep, let's say 75%, 80%, and then the rest goes towards maintaining the platform and the business. And so I think, you know, being okay with like pushing against the norms to make sure that you're fully benefiting, because again, this is a business. And I think people try to act like it's not. And I always tell people, well, if it's not a business, give away your paintings for free. And then they were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, if you're not willing to give away your paintings for free, then this is a business, right? And I think we get uncomfortable in those conversations. But that's the reality, that you've produced this thing, you've assigned a particular fair market price to it, and someone's going to buy it to live with it, enjoy it, be a steward of it. So I think more transparency about that. And I think transparency just in general, because like the amount of times I'll talk to artists and they're doing the show and I'll ask them a basic question and they don't have the answer. And I'm like, you didn't discuss this? And they're like, they didn't tell us. And it's just like, you know, you got to kind of just be diligent. I think the more diligent and transparent and straightforward you are, I think the better just for the working relationship, because I think if they understand that, okay, this is how I got to communicate with them, then everybody's going to be on point or aim to be. And then if they're not, you can call it out.
So I have to ask, who are some of your favorite artists right now? Or who are some artists that are like just doing their thing right now?
February James, Chase Hall, John Rivas, Ludovic, Endkoth, Tiffany Alfonseca, Jamie Holmes in Dallas, Mpiwe in LA, Signa Sampson, South Africa, Mink Smith, OG, photographer, Patrick Olson, from the Bronx, David Schroeb, who just opened a solo show in LA,
nice,
with Steve Turner, Damian Davis, who just launched his project where he's fundraising for all these different organizations, Jordan Castile, who I've known since she was at Yale. My uncle, Mel Chin, OG.
Nice.
Mwako, Boafo, Otis, Conrad, Patrick, Atu, Gisela McDaniel, Devin B. Johnson, Jamal, Amani Lewis. There's so many.
Yeah, there's so many.
Peter Williams. Peter Williams. Rashid has been crushing it in quarantine. Mickalene Thomas. I mean, there's so many. A new kid that I met, Timothy. From North Philly. Was in and out of the prison industrial complex, and finally has like been able to somewhat extrapolate himself from that. And is really doing some interesting things, not only his practice, but really trying to be a voice for prison reform.
Wow. Nice. That was a long list. In my head, I had like this like cartoon of like the list just like rolling down.
Oh yeah. You know, but I think those are all artists that I'm in dialogue in some shape or form with. I mean, there's more.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not a hierarchical thing, but those are the people who just came to mind.
Lasagna, I know you work with
Lasagna Cruz, of course. Genevieve Bernard, Kennedy Yanko, Basil Kincaid, Nate Lewis, Kentura Davis, Kim.
Yeah.
Farley Aguilar, Nicole Salcedo, Adler Guerrier, Ferrari Shepard, Aram Hansi Fuentes.
Wow, you have good memory.
Yeah, there's mad
When
people.
when I'm thinking of a show, I'm like, I don't know why. I'm like, yo, like, wait, I need a list. Like, I go to my list.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are
My
all
Instagram,
people
like,
that.
okay, yeah, you know.
These are all people that I'm in dialogue, whether it's like through Instagram or we do virtual visits.
Yeah.
Like the show that I did at Viz Arts, Parallels and Peripheries. Aram was the foundation for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to do another show with Aram, and so she was my starting point.
Yeah.
She's an immigrant.
Had the banners in the show.
Yeah. She had the banners, the protest banners. So I said, for me, this is the starting point. So a lot of times these dialogues, these artists are the starting point of the conversation, and then I build around them.
That's true.
It's almost like a franchise player, and then you build the team around them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, usually it does. Yeah, for me, I would go to some studio visits or I'll see some work on Instagram that I'm like, oh, shoot, this is fire.
Yeah.
And I'll like see another artist that's also speaking on that theme. And yeah, it does start with like 2 or 3 people that I'm like, okay, like I just have one word that maybe connects them. And then I find more like connections.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are some things you are working on right now? Some plugs, things people should tune into.
So I'm doing this show in Rome in November, group show, Parallels and Peripheries. I think this is like part 4. And that'll have Contura, Kim, Dave, Basil, Kennedy. Why am I missing? And Nate Lewis.
Nice.
Co-curating the Athens Biennale with Social Club next spring. Curating a solo show of Amber Robles Gordon's work at American University next fall. Art Noir, we got our Jar of Love Fund grant.
True.
So launching that and looking to begin to award the first grantees.
Nice.
And then there's some other things in the pipeline that aren't confirmed, but I'm already like planned out to 2022.
Nice.
And so for me, it's like now trying to do less shows, but like more energy and intensity. And then just find other platforms, you know, so whether it's working with corporate folks or, you know, like I did my parchment paper print, so I want to do more of that. And that's raising money for Lauren Halsey's project, Some of Everything Art Center's organic food box in the co-feed. So wanting to just kind of put more creative production out myself. You know, and just taking it day by day. And enjoying, being mindful, being intentional, and just making sure I'm having fun and learning and growing.
Yep. And I see you biking.
And biking. So,
cool.
But I'm blessed. You know, at the end of the day, I'm blessed to do this and make a living. So I try not to take this for granted and just, you know, work hard, do my part, and hopefully it reaps benefits, bountiful benefits.
Yep. So thank you so much, Larry.
Thank you.
The whole time you were talking, I was just like, I feel good knowing that these gems were dropped and people are going to hear this and hopefully apply it to their lives, or artists are going to apply it to their practice. I hope it inspires them. It inspired me. So thank you so much. And we're going to end on that note. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Peace.